So welcome again, everyone. I'm Brett Thielen. I'm the Science Director at the Harris Center for Conservation Education, which is a nonprofit based in Hancock, New Hampshire. Um, and we're really excited to be bringing you tonight's Zoom. I recognize many familiar names, so some of this will be familiar to some, if not all of you, but we are recording this Zoom. So if you don't wish to appear anywhere in that recording, the best thing to do is to turn off your video. That can also help if your internet is slow or wonky or unstable. Mine sometimes gets that way. You might see me turning off my video for that reason. Um, we do have closed captioning enabled, so you can decide for yourself whether you'd like to see the subtitles or not. If you look down at the bottom of your screen, it might be under More. It might be under there's all different ways on different people's screens. It might be under settings or a little CC button. You can say to show captions or hide captions. Um, we do not, we have, we're asking everyone to put their questions into the chat, and we will ask those questions during a couple of Q&A periods over the talk. So feel free to put your questions throughout in the chat, and just ask you to keep it on topic. We're here for butterflies. So I think that's it for our Zoom reminders. Um, but now I guess I'll just do a little bit of introductions for anyone who might be new to us. The Harris Center for Conservation Education is a nonprofit based in the Monadnock region of Southwest New Hampshire. We like to say that we help people fall in love with the natural world. We do that through land protection. We've protected more than 27,000 acres. We're working our way towards 28,000 acres right now, much of which is open for hiking and butterfly watching and other recreation. We offer environmental education for all ages, including working in more than 40 local schools and also public programs for the general public. That's you all, everything from Zoom talks like this to film showings to guided hikes and paddles. We have some butterfly field forays coming up. And also, one of the things that I do at the organization is conservation research and helping connect to the natural world through science, and in particular, community science, where we work with community volunteers to kinds of ecological data with a big focus on wildlife. So that's one of the things that you're going to learn about tonight is a project that we've been participating in and contributing to, a international project actually, that we've been contributing data to from one of our conserved lands in Peterborough. I do want to remind you or let you know about a few upcoming butterfly related events that might be of interest. We have another Monarch related Zoom coming up on August 5th. It's called Butterflies Without Borders, Tracking the Monarch Migration. And that's with New Hampshire Audubon biologist Lindsay Hurley, who's going to be talking about some of their cutting edge technologies that they're using to track the monarch migration through transmitters. That's co-sponsored with New Hampshire Audubon. I'll put a link in the chat after we're done. And then for those of you who want to join us in person, we have our annual Super Sanctuary Butterfly Count coming up on July 18th. This is where we break into teams. We fan out within our count circle, usually in 4 or 5 different teams, and search for as many butterflies as we can find, identify them, count them, and contribute that data to the New Hampshire Butterfly Monitoring Network, as well as the North American Butterfly Association. And I know we have a few of our butterfly count participants here who can attest that you don't need to be an expert. This is an amazing day of learning in the field. I'm still learning myself. And we have at least one person on each team who really knows their butterfly ID, and the rest of us get to learn from them. So that's Saturday, July 18th. And then I'll also lastly mention, after you hear the talk tonight, I'm hoping that you'll be inspired to come out and look for monarch caterpillars and eggs as part of the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And if you want to see what that's like and get some hands-on experience with other folks before starting your own monitoring plot, we're going to have 3 monitoring days this summer. The first one is July 23rd. And then we also have one in August and one in early September. So I'll put those links in the chat. You can learn more about all of that and register for any or all of the above at harriscenter.org. So lots for the butterfly lovers in our neck of the woods this summer. And with that, I'm excited to introduce our speaker for tonight, who is a really big name in monarch biology and conservation, Dr. Karen Oberhauser, who's been working with her students for 40 years to conduct research on aspects of monarch butterfly ecology using traditional lab techniques, field techniques, as well as the contributions of community science or participatory science. She started the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project in 1996 and was the director of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Arboretum from 2017 to 2023, where she incorporated this Monarch Larvae Monitoring Project and many other projects into ecological data collection. She's also worked with K through 12 teachers going way back to 1992 to use monarchs and the connections that people feel for these incredible butterflies to help promote greater understanding of science and conservation. So I'm really excited to welcome her to our Granite State audience and to learn from her and hopefully inspire all of you to start getting out there and looking for monarchs and counting them and contributing to this continental data set. So take it away, Karen.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Thanks for that introduction. Sorry, I was flashing things around behind you. I thought I don't want to be doing this while I'm trying to talk. So hopefully you can see my screen now.
Looks great.
Good. Yeah, like Brett said, I will be talking about the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And the way that I've set up this talk is I'll kind of start with some basic monarch biology that's relevant to the project and then talk about the project. We often do day-long trainings for this project, so you're not going to learn all of the details, but you'll have kind of a picture of what it's like to monitor, and you'll know where to get the resources to learn how to do it, or you can just tag along with Brett's team. So I just retired from the UW-Madison Arboretum almost 2 years ago right now. So I'm back to full-time monarchs, which is really, I feel really lucky to be doing that. And I've put some of the organizations I'm working with up here on the screen. We have a monarch collaborative in Wisconsin, which is a whole bunch of organizations working together on monarch education and conservation. I'm also on the board of the Monarch Butterfly Fund, which mostly works to preserve habitat in Mexico, and then the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. So I'm involved with outreach and education and land conservation and science with monarchs. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have after this talk. I'll give you my contact information. So we'll start, like I said, with just some monarch biology 101, just so you kind of, we're all on the same page with what we need to know about monarchs to understand this project. So we'll start with the life cycle, and I'll just go quickly through that because probably a lot of you know this. I'll say first that the scientific name of monarchs is Danaus plexippus. And I'll just say monarch through this, but you can always say Danaus plexippus if you'd like. They start out life like all insects with complete metamorphosis as an egg. And they're an egg for about 4 to 5 days under normal summertime conditions. So the egg hatches, becomes a caterpillar. And during that time, the monarchs go through 5 larval instars. So that word is spelled just like it sounds, I-N-S-T-A-R, instar. And those are the periods in between shedding their skin. So if you imagine a little tiny egg that's about the size of a pinhead, if you hold your fingers together and get them basically as close as they can get without touching, that's how big the egg is. And out of that egg hatches a tiny caterpillar that was little enough to fit inside that pinhead of an egg. That's the first instar. They shed their skin and become a second instar, a third instar, a fourth instar, and a fifth instar. So I managed once way back when to get all 5 of them into one picture with the egg. So that's the result of that. During that 9 to 13 day period, they increase their body mass about 2,000 times. So the fifth instar weighs about 2,000 times more than the first instar. They then become a pupa. The pupa is a stage that doesn't eat or grow. It's just inside that pupa turning into a butterfly. They're a pupa for just a tiny bit shorter time under the same temperature conditions as they were a caterpillar. They usually don't pupate on milkweed, but this picture happens to be of one on a milkweed plant. And there's actually an egg in that picture, which is kind of cool next to it, showing you the size difference. And then they become an adult. They're an adult depending on whether they live in the summer or if they're in the migratory generation. They live for 2 to 6 weeks as a summer non-migratory butterfly and 8 to 10 months as a migratory butterfly. So there we have the life cycle. And during that time, they depend on milkweed. So the females almost only lay eggs on milkweed. There are a few other closely related species that aren't in the same genus that aren't called milkweed, but they're really closely related. So females will lay eggs on these milkweed plant. Here you see the female bending her abdomen around and laying an egg, in this case on the stem. It's usually on the leaf, but not always, as we can see in this picture. And just before the egg hatches, you start to be able to see the head of it. So this caterpillar, or this egg on the top, the caterpillar is chewing its way out of its egg casing. Usually there's only one egg on a plant, but there can be more, as you can see in this picture. So this picture was taken in the wild. It had a lot of eggs on it, but that's pretty rare. While monarchs are specialists on milkweed, there are lots of species of milkweed native to North America. And here I love that you guys are in the Northeast and I'm in Wisconsin, but we're all together in what we call the northeastern part of the country when we're talking about milkweed. So you'll have basically the same kinds of milkweed that we have here in the upper Midwest. Common milkweed is super common where you are. This is swamp milkweed, the bottom right one. And butterfly weed is this one right here with the bright orange flowers, which where I live are just starting to flower right now. And then we have some really cool species all over the country. We have this one in Wisconsin. It's called whorled milkweed. Actually, I'm not sure if you have it there. It's kind of a prairie species, but yeah, you don't have that one. Yeah, so these three will be your most common kinds of milkweed. But monarch caterpillars will eat all of these. And they have basically the same structure of the flowers, but they can look really different with this showy milkweed from the west having these beautiful showy flowers. The colors are really variable, the size of the flowers. This is green milkweed, has great big green flowers. So variation, but they're all related and monarchs can eat all of them. Once they become an adult, they start to not eat milkweed, the leaves anymore. They can nectar on milkweed flowers. But I'm just going to have you just to see, I can't see the chat, but you can look at it, Brett, and tell me. I'd like you to tell me which one of these is the male monarch, the one on the right or the one on the left? So you can just type it in the chat and we'll just see what the background knowledge is of people here.
We have
What?
a few guesses for the one on the right.
Okay, well, that's a good guess. If that was your guess, congratulations. That is the male. And we can tell that because of these little dots that you can see on his hind wing. See those? Those are specialized scales. They're called androconial patches. And in closely related butterflies, the male emits a pheromone through these that signals to the female that he wants to mate with them. But we think that there's kind of like a vestigial organ in monarchs that they don't produce a lot of pheromones. But that's how you can tell the male and female apart. The male also looks like he has slightly thinner veins on his wings. See that, how they look wider on the female? They're not. They just have more brown scales over them. But that's another difference that you can see in the male and female butterfly. So the big job of the adults, the job of the caterpillars is to grow and grow and grow, increasing their body mass so quickly. And the big job of the adults is to mate and lay eggs. So here we have a mating pair. Oops. So this pair is mating and they remain in copula like this for hours, sometimes overnight. It can be like 14 or 15 hours that they're together. And it's really fun to find a mating pair in the wild. The male will fly around carrying the female. So if you see that happening, it's a natural thing. I see, a few every summer. So as adults, the butterflies eat nectar from flowers. But as you can see from this picture, they will eat nectar from lots and lots of different flowers. And if you have a prairie or a natural habitat, there are different flowers blooming at different times of the summer. So they need nectar for the whole time they're there. Now, I have another question for you. Actually, I can see the chat. Um, yeah, so I can see your answers right. So there are two pictures here that don't really belong. So look closely at these pictures and see if you can tell um, which of them don't belong with the others. And I'll give you a clue that one of them is about the butterfly and one of them is about the flower. I'm not seeing any answers. Somebody can be brave. It's kind of a hard question. All right. Yay, Tom. Tom Gardner. Good job. You said the upper right is the viceroy. So that's good. So you can all look at that. It looks a lot like the adult monarch, but it has these extra lines on the hind wing. So you can see the monarch does not have those lines on its hind wing, and that both the male and the female have them. So good job on that. So is there a plant that doesn't fit here? This is a pretty hard question. And I won't wait too long for your answer, but just in case somebody gets it. You know this one, Tom? All right. I'm gonna tell you the answer right now. So all top second from the left. Yes. Nora, yes. And Brett. Good job. Nora and Brett, you knew. So that's a lilac. And what's different about the lilac is it's not native. So lilacs are not native to North America. All these other flowers are native. You would have them where you are, and I have them where I am. But lilacs are introduced. And I put this picture in here to tell you that they will nectar on non-native plants. And sometimes in the spring, when monarchs are first coming back, lilacs are one of the best sources of nectar for them. So while I always encourage native plants, it's okay to have a few that aren't native. They actually love dandelions too. So that's what we have here. We have this non-native lilac and we have the viceroy snuck in here. But all these other plants are native and they love them all. Okay, let's see here now. Here we go. So we were talking about somebody had seen a black swallowtail caterpillar already this year on their dill. So once people know you're a monarch expert, which you will be after this hour, they will come to you and say, there's a monarch on my parsley or my dill or my carrots. And monarchs will never be on anybody's dill. What they're seeing almost always is a black swallowtail caterpillar. So that's what this one is. And it superficially looks a little bit like a monarch because it's got black stripes on it, but monarchs aren't green. They're white and yellow and black. So this is a black swallowtail caterpillar, not a monarch. The other thing people think is that, well, some people think that all butterflies are monarchs. I got an email from somebody the other day that was concerned because she had a big yellow monarch that was injured in her yard, and it was a tiger swallowtail. But a lot of people think that every butterfly is a monarch. and at least that every orange and black butterfly is a monarch. This is a Gulf fritillary, which neither of us would have, neither in New Hampshire or in Wisconsin, but it sort of superficially looks like a monarch. There's lots and lots of orange and black butterflies. So if you see something that's way too small, it's probably not a monarch. Okay, so here's your next quiz. Um, you can type this in the chat too. Which of these is a monarch inside here? Oh, lilacs are your state flower. That's pretty interesting. All right, Sarah said three, Tom said three. All right, looks like we have a lot of monarch experts here. You're not getting fooled by the other two. So you're right. Number three is the monarch. I guess we already gave away the viceroy, but here's what the viceroy looks like from the bottom. So this is a queen. You would not see queens in New Hampshire. You would see viceroys, and of course, you'll see monarchs. So I'm going to click again. Oh, here's the answer: the queen, the viceroy, and the monarch. You can see that queens are closely related to monarchs. They're both in the same genus. Viceroys are not that closely related. And here's what their caterpillars look like of these other two species. The queen does look a lot like monarchs. It's got these long tentacles in the front and back. It has another pair of them in the middle. These are a southern species that live all across the southern part of the United States. And this is what a viceroy caterpillar looks like. Um, I kind of like to think of even the caterpillar is a mimic. The butterfly is mimicking monarchs, the adult, and the caterpillar is actually mimicking a bird dropping, which no bird would want to eat a bird dropping. So that's that caterpillar. There's the viceroy. Looks nothing like a monarch caterpillar. Okay, so monarchs, besides having this individual life cycle, they have an annual life cycle. So that's their migratory cycle. And I sort of think of the migratory cycle encompasses many individual life cycles, but it too has four different parts. So the way I break this down in my head is monarchs, the annual cycle is divided between migrating south. And at this point, they're not reproducing. They're in a physiological state that we say diapause. So they've basically put a pause on their development. The females don't have mature eggs in them. The males' testes and ejaculatory duct are really small. I have measured them. So there's migrating south, there's overwintering, coming back north, and then breeding, kind of these four different parts. So just because it's easier for me to make the maps, I'm going to start with fall. So this map tells the story kind of beginning in mid to late August. So monarchs are leaving their whole breeding range and flying south into Mexico if they're east of the Rocky Mountains. The monarchs that are west of the Rocky Mountains go to sites along the coast of California, but some of them migrate into Mexico and join our population. So it's not two completely separate populations, but pretty separate. So we have another interesting thing going on with this migration. So most monarchs, including yours from New Hampshire, move south, and yours probably move south, stay east of the Rocky Mountains, and then turn west to head to Mexico. But some monarchs from the East Coast don't go to Mexico, but instead fly down into Florida, and where they join this continuously breeding population in southern Florida. But most of your monarchs, and virtually all of the monarchs from where I am, fly to Mexico or fly south toward Mexico. Some of them drop out of the migration. We won't really talk about those, but there is breeding that occurs along the Gulf Coast in the fall and winter. So then they get to the Mexican overwintering site. So a monarch from New Hampshire or Wisconsin flies all that way, beginning in mid to late August. They start arriving in Mexico at their overwintering sites in early November or late October. And then those very same butterflies, so this yellow arrow represents the beginning of the spring migration, start coming north. but they don't get all the way north. So those butterflies kind of move into the United States through Texas, spread out over this kind of basically the southeastern quarter of the country. Then they die, but they're laying eggs all the way north, and it's their offspring that get back to us. And because they have longer to go to get to where you are, way up here, it's a shorter distance to get to where I am. You usually see them later. So you kind of miss our first breeding generation because they're still heading back. There are some that go really fast, but we get monarchs in the spring earlier than you do. So they've just got a long, long ways to go to get there. Okay, so then this new generation moves northward, and then they go through 2 to 3 generations that don't migrate. So these are just breeding generations. They move, they fly around, but they don't have directed flight. And then the last generation of the year starts the cycle again. And one of the things that we take advantage of is that during this period of overwintering, most of the monarchs in North America are concentrated in these overwintering areas, either along the coast of California or in central Mexico. So we can kind of have our finger on the pulse of the population by counting them, by measuring the size of the population in the wintertime. And in California, people count every butterfly. In Mexico, we can't do that. There's just too many of them. So we measure the area that they're on, the area basically covered with trees, covered with monarchs. So in Mexico, monarchs are measured in hectares, and in California, they're measured in individual butterflies. So that's the annual cycle. And to think about that cycle in pictures instead of lines on a map, that helps us think about what monarchs need during all of those same stages. So if we think of monarchs in the fall, they need nectar. So they need plants. They actually gain weight when they're migrating south because they nectar all along the way. They're building up fat stores to keep them alive all winter. And they need places to stop and rest at night because they don't fly during the nighttime. So they have what we call these roosting sites where the monarchs are stopping at night along, just often in clusters, sometimes much smaller clusters, sometimes individually. They stop at night to rest and then fly again the next day. Sorry, when I move my mouse, my slides change. Then when they get to the overwintering sites, their basic job is to stay alive. They get there in November. They don't leave until March. So they just hang out and stay alive. Every once in a while, they'll all fly up into the sky. You see these huge flights of them in the air. But most of the time in these trees in Mexico, they're just hanging in the trees. And then as when it comes to mid-March and they start flying north again, they need nectar, just like they did in the fall as they were migrating. And they're basically moving north with milkweed. So I sort of think of as the milkweed is spreading northward, coming back, it's mostly perennial plants. As it comes up, the monarchs move into an area. So this picture was taken in Oklahoma. This is a female laying eggs on a little green milkweed plant. It found this tiny, tiny plant and it's laying an egg. You can actually, if you have a big screen, you can see the egg in that picture that the female is laying. And then they get up to New Hampshire and the upper Midwest, the whole northern part of the country, northeastern part of the country. And that's when the population grows. So they have these 2 to 3 generations up here, and the population is expanding in size because there are multiple generations. So at this point, they need nectar plants, they need milkweed. So that's the whole cycle. So it's a cycle. And in order for the monarch phenomenon, the migratory phenomenon to continue, each one of these parts of the cycle has to be there. So they have to have the things they need spread out over that entire map that I showed you. But even though it's a cycle, the basis of that cycle is breeding. So all of the monarchs in Mexico come from the north. They come from milkweed patches in the northeastern United States and the upper Midwest. And that's what we're studying with the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. We're kind of studying the beginning of this cycle, that all of the monarchs that migrate to Mexico, we're studying their production. So that kind of brings us to the MLMP. And I will stop now if there are any questions, Brett. That
There's
okay,
some natural history questions.
great.
Um, Tom is wondering what altitude they fly during migration,
Great
whether you
question.
know.
Yeah, and they actually find the altitude that's best for them. So if there's a south wind as they're migrating south and it's a windy day, but they really want to get out of Dodge, they'll fly low to the ground. So you'll see them really low. There was a monarch biologist once who was a hang glider, and he found them up over a kilometer above
Wow,
the earth. So they're finding the elevation that's best for them. So they'll use air currents. So just like birds do that kettle, birds will use upward warm air currents. And you'll sometimes see that like over a dark parking lot or coming up to mountains, they'll soar up with the air and then glide down. So they're really conserving as much energy as possible.
that's really interesting. We one of the things the Harris Center does in the fall is we run a hawk watch at one of our local mountains at Miller State Park, and they also, just as the hawks are kettling up and being counted there, monarchs are as well.
Yeah,
So they're keeping
yeah,
count of our as they pass by.
that's really
Um,
cool.
Yeah. So a question that another migration related question. So if I understand correctly what you said, the ones that we have that are starting to arrive in like right now or early July are let's see, two generations removed from Mexico. So the butterflies who overwintered in Mexico flew to the southeast somewhere, laid eggs, and then those are the ones that are
Yeah,
arriving here.
you probably a butterfly now, if you're seeing butterflies coming back, they could be the offspring of the migrants, of the ones that migrated. So the ones so imagine one leaving in the fall, flying all the way to Mexico, coming halfway back,
Hmm.
laying eggs along the way. So the
Oh,
first new generation of the year is that generation that moves northward. But at
okay.
this point, a lot of those butterflies are starting to die off, and there would be enough time for another generation to have happened in there. So the butterflies that you get way up in New Hampshire are probably the first ones are probably the progeny of the ones that migrated. And the ones that are coming later, as your population builds up, you're probably starting to get some grand progeny.
Okay. And do you have any sense for like for those butterflies, like how far they typically will fly before they decide to settle down and start laying eggs and
Well, they will lay eggs as they're moving north. So
oh,
the breeding generation, so it's only the fall generation that migrates without laying eggs. They just fly.
okay.
The other ones are laying eggs as they're moving northward. So and we'll learn. So I'm really excited that you're having somebody from the Monarch Project with the radio tags coming to talk with you this later this summer, because that, for those of you that haven't heard of this, and I'm trying to save time tonight, so I took this slide
Yes.
out of my talk, but that technology is going to revolutionize what we understand about monarchs, because we could never track and we could, we put tags on monarchs. We could, know we tagged them at some location and we found them again some location which might be 500 or 1,000 miles to the south. Now we can track the daily movement of monarchs with these radio tags. So we'll be able to answer questions like that in a lot more detail.
Amazing.
It's super exciting, and it's brand new. Just started last year.
That is really exciting.
Yeah, so
Um,
exciting.
so Suzanne's wondering about predators.
Yeah, so many predators. I'm going to show you some survival rates in a couple slides, but there's very low survival. So when an egg is laid, it has about a 5% chance of ever getting to be an adult.
Wow.
So a lot of things eat them, mostly invertebrates, other insects. Well, there are some non-insect invertebrates that eat them. Spiders and mites, little predatory mites, little tiny mites that you see will eat them. Many kinds of predatory bugs, true bugs, beetles. Um, there are some like the those introduced ladybug beetles, your multicolored Asian ladybug will eat them, and other kinds of ladybugs. Um, Milkweed bugs will sometimes eat them by mistake. That we because they're eating the leaves, but they'll sometimes eat an egg along with the leaf. And then there are all sorts of parasitoid wasps and flies that eat them, um,
Wow.
that are parasites on them. So yeah, there's a lot of things out there. If you're that little, there's going to be a lot of things eating you. Wasps will catch them, predatory wasps, those Polistes, the introduced wasps will get them.
And do they have predators as flying as butterflies as well?
Yeah, praying mantids will catch the adult butterflies, and some birds, there are birds that eat them in Mexico, and a scissor-tail flycatcher has been seen catching the butterflies. Somebody sent me a picture once of a frog that caught a monarch. I don't know if it ate it, but it did catch it out of the air, jumped up and caught it.
Wow.
So yeah, but most of the mortality occurs as young larvae, eggs and larvae.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the last one, Pam's asking how to deal with orange aphids, or are they and I guess my follow-up is, are they a problem for monarchs? Are they of concern?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So those I think of them as yellowish orange, those bright yellow aphids, those are non-native. They're called oleander aphids or Aphis nerii. And those are, they can really get densities that are enough to really hurt the plant. If I see a lot of them on plants, I will sometimes, the question is how to deal with them. I will sometimes, like, if there are a whole bunch of them at the top of the plant, I'll pick off the top of the plant and put them in the freezer to kill them, or just use my fingers to kill them. They go through cycles. So some years you'll see a lot of them, some years you won't see many. We keep track of those with the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. We just ask for every time people monitor, we say, did you see any of those bright yellow aphids? Because we're kind of tracking how they're moving through the country. So the problems with them, they don't hurt monarchs directly, but they can hurt the plant if there's enough of them, and they attract predators. So a lot of things eat them, and because there's such a high density, they'll bring in predators to the plant that might then eat the monarchs. So a lot of ants will come to tend them, and they'll eat the monarchs. So yeah, they high densities of them can be a problem. Yep.
All right. Well, thank you. I think we should move along
We
because I
will
know there's still
move
lots
on.
of other stuff to cover, but I
Yeah.
think we've got most of the questions answered. So
Okay.
thank you.
Good. Thanks for those great questions. So now we'll move on talking about monarch citizen science, whatever you want to call it. There are many, it's an argument within the community right now. We used to say citizen science, that's a complicated term right now. Community science, participatory science, they all mean the same thing. People who aren't professional scientists contributing to science. And I'm a professional scientist, but I'm also a citizen scientist because I do bird projects and frog projects, and monarch projects. So it's basically doing science without getting paid for it, kind of. So there are a ton of projects that look at monarchs. They're really intensively monitored throughout this whole cycle of migrating and overwintering and breeding. Um, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just wanted to point out that they're monitored throughout that whole cycle. So the project that you do there, the North American butterfly count, those data are super useful to us when we're trying to understand monarchs because monarchs are one of the species that people record when they're out looking at butterflies. So we get a lot of information from these butterfly monitoring networks. I know you have one in New Hampshire. I didn't list it because I listed the oldest ones. And then all the ones at the bottom are specific to monarchs. So lots of people out there helping us understand monarchs. And basically, what we're doing with most of these projects is trying to understand how the population is doing and what are the vulnerable stages. So, like I said before, we can measure all of them at once at their overwintering sites in Mexico. So, this graph is showing you the size of the forest that has monarchs on it. So, the picture up there is basically what these colonies look like. The trees in an area will be covered with monarchs, and there's a definite edge to that. So basically, scientists in Mexico, from I put it at the bottom here, the Monarch Butterfly Biosphere Reserve and WWF Mexico, measure that area every year. And here's what's happened to it. We have this period in the beginning, sort of in the 1990s and into the beginning of the 2000s, where there's a lot of fluctuation, up, down, but it wasn't declining or increasing. And then we go through a period from in the early 2000s where the population declined because of habitat loss, breeding habitat loss. And now we're back in another period of relative stasis. I mean, it's not steady every year, but it goes up and down. And most people would argue that it's no longer declining. So for the last 10 or so years, it's relatively constantly it's moving up and down around an average. So what we do with the MLMP and other projects is try to understand what are the main drivers of these numbers from year to year and over a long time period. So yeah, I basically just said that. So the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project is the only one that looks in detail at breeding monarchs. So here's our website, mlmp.org. And basically, this is a site-based project where people monitor a specific site. It can be anywhere there's milkweed growing, a garden, a park, a roadside, a prairie, anywhere there's milkweed. You can see on this map where we have had sites over time. Some of these were just monitored 1 year, some for multiple years. But here's sort of the extent of our project. And you can see it's mostly in the east. We have some sites in the west. And then people provide a description of their site. So they say, is it a garden? Is it a big open prairie area? Is it a site at a nature center like this one with the kids? What is the site? And they tell us what milkweed species are growing there, the density of those milkweed species. And then they go out every week and look at their milkweed plants and count the monarch eggs and caterpillars on these plants. So this is the weekly monitoring. And we can also get non-site reports. So if people are on vacation or something and they just want to monitor a site, they don't have to go into all of the detail of the site description. So, the sites can really vary. This site down here actually is at the airport in Minnesota in the Twin Cities. So our website describes how to monitor. The website, mlmp.org, has a bar at the top that shows you, conservation of monarchs, what the results, what people have found, resources, but there's a link to monitoring. And that has all of the information you need to monitor, all of the data sheets with directions and everything that you can do. It has hints for monitoring with kids. There's just a ton of stuff there if you just click on monitoring. There's a bunch of training materials under Get Started. So all the resources that you would need are there. So I hope some of you decide to do this. And the different activities that people can do, we have data sheets for all of these. They describe the site, all the information we get about the site, measuring milkweed density. And I'm going to talk very briefly about measuring monarch density and estimating monarch survival here. But you can do a lot of things. You don't have to do it all. It can take anywhere from 20 minutes a week to 2 hours, depending on how many plants you look at and how many people do it with you. So basically, what we're getting is breeding numbers from the eggs and caterpillars. So we produce graphs that look like this. And I'm showing you graphs from Wisconsin because we have quite a few monitors here. So, like a lot of graphs, they have time across the x-axis by weeks of the summer. And the y-axis is monarchs per milkweed plant. So people keep track of the number of plants that they look at and how many eggs and caterpillars they see. And they identify the caterpillars to instar. So I told you about instars before. But what you can see here, so the blue on these bars, these are called stacked bars. It's a stacked bar graph. The blue is the density of the eggs. So like at this week, the week of 7/16 in 2023, there were about 0.2 eggs per plant. So that means out of 100 plants, about 20 of them had an egg on them. And then the other colors are the different larval instars. So the first thing you see here is a lot more blue. And that shows you the question about predation. It shows you there's a lot of predation of these eggs and small caterpillars that most of them never even get to be first instars. You also see the generations. So in Wisconsin this year, we had monarchs coming back in the middle of May. So these are the eggs laid by those butterflies that come back from the south. Then they start turning into butterflies, and we get a couple more generations. Oops, sorry. A couple more generations in here that start overlapping. So we usually have a small peak of the eggs laid by the butterflies that come back from the south, and then a bigger peak that it's a couple overlapping generations of monarchs. And we can see from how this graph looks how the years are different. So here was a really strange year, 2012. This was strange all through the country. It was an early spring, so you can see people were seeing monarchs in April. That's super unusual to see any monarchs back here in April. So they started seeing them early, and the numbers just went up so fast. So they had a really good fall, or a really good spring in the south, and they got up here and look at the difference in the y-axis here. So this is getting up to 1.5. That means on average, if you look at 100 plants, you're seeing 150 monarchs. That's just totally unusual. It was just a really strange year. And then it got really hot and dry that summer. After this incredible spring, the population just tanked. So usually we get a small generation and then higher numbers, but this year was exactly the opposite. So we can see what the weather's like from what the monarchs are doing. And the next year in Mexico was very low because we didn't send a lot of monarchs back. So last year we had a pretty good year. It was kind of, in terms of how they've been recently, it was kind of like it was in 2023, better than 2024. We had really interesting things going on in Wisconsin. We had this week of rain last year in early May, and then the females just hunker down. They don't fly around in the rain, so we got this weird drop, but then they came back out again and started laying eggs again. So we can see what's going on by looking at the numbers of monarchs that people are seeing. So we get a lot of information, but one of the reasons when I first contacted Brett, and I said to her, "You are one of the very few sites in New Hampshire, and thanks. I wanted to hear about what she was doing with this and her site in Petersboro." So this is what we have this year in Monarchs. We just have one person in Rye named Katie Broder who's measuring monarchs, and she's gone out every week and looked at monarchs. So yay, Katie. I was thinking, wow, that would be so cool if she was here. Last year, we had 4 different sites monitored, including the Harris Center site, but we had Catherine Brooks, Heidi Emmons. Heidi did 2 sites. So we see this pattern, but you can see that your monarchs, people don't start seeing monarchs in New Hampshire until a little later than we do in Wisconsin. But then you keep seeing them through August. So, wherever you are, if you wanted to join this team and get us some more data from New Hampshire, that would be really great. Um, I also have to say about where you are in New Hampshire is that it's not quite as satisfying to monitor monarchs there because you tend to see fewer. So here's 2025 in Wisconsin. Last year we got up to 0.25 monarchs per milkweed plant, and you were quite a bit under that, 0.15, a little over 0.15. So there aren't as many, and I think that's kind of discouraging to people, but we really need people to be monitoring when they're not seeing a lot of monarchs. And I wanted to show another way to monitor, and this is what Brett is doing as part of another big citizen science project, monitoring monarchs for something we call the Bio Blitz or the Monarch Blitz, to go out and during a specific week in the summer, just see how monarchs are doing. So these are the data from the site that Brett's team is monitoring for the last 4 years. So it's also possible to just go out once a year. We don't get the long-term picture of what's going on at the site. We just get a snapshot, but that's still valuable to have that snapshot. Super interesting. So seeing a lot more caterpillars than eggs because it's later in the season, but you miss what's building up to that, but we still get data. So even though we recommend monitoring once a week, so we really get that whole picture at the site and you get the whole picture, it doesn't have to be done that way. So we were talking they'll monitor maybe once a month to get 3 different snapshots in time. So many, many different ways to do this project. And everything is valuable. You can see they're monitoring a lot of plants when they go out, 262, 241. So in 2022, you guys were monitoring you monitored 537 plants. That's a lot of plants to monitor.
We do have that we're doing this as a group, and you all are invited to join us. And when there's not a lot of caterpillars, it also doesn't take a whole lot of time to look at,
Yeah,
to move through a lot of plants, which is probably part of the reason that we're able to do so much. We only typically are going out for an hour, 1 to 2 hours at a time. So
yeah, yeah. So many, many different ways to do this and to engage other people in it. So thank you, Brett, for doing this. So it was interesting. You said this, and I didn't even change my slide after you said it. It is like a treasure hunt to be looking at these plants. This is a butterfly milkweed plant, and turning over a leaf and seeing an egg on it is just like super fun. So it's like you're out there on a treasure hunt looking for eggs, looking for these tiny first instar caterpillars. You recognize the first instar because they have a black head, but they're little. They fit in that little tiny egg, so they're very small at this stage, but you can still see them. So it is super fun to do it, and especially fun when you're finding something. So the other project that I wanted to just mention in my last couple minutes here is measuring the survival of the caterpillars. Another thing that some of our volunteers do is bring in eggs and larvae into a nature center or their kitchen and rearing them inside. And we're measuring survival. We're especially interested in parasitoids. So people have different ways of doing this. These are monarchs that I rear. I use these little deli containers. Each one of them has one caterpillar inside it. I rear 10 to 15 every year just because I love doing it. Um, this was a woman in Michigan who reared them in jars, and she started them out in little small containers. So many different ways to do this, but we have learned a lot about natural rates of survival, um, especially with respect to parasitoids from this project. So people record the outcome on our website. There's a whole separate place you can go to record this information. So that's something that you can also do if you're interested in that. So that's kind of it for the information I'm going to give you. And now we'll have a little bit of time to answer questions. But this is a screenshot of our website. And everything you need to know is here. So if you click on Get Started, that that takes you to training, online training videos, and a ton of information about the project. Resources you need are here. There's a lot of information packages and information on telling these instars apart. And then the data portal is up here, and it's not that hard. We're all getting used to entering data on websites now. So you enter the data here. You have a local expert in Brett that can help you. And if you have questions, you can just email me at info@mlmp.org. So I'm going to stop. I have that. I guess I didn't put that. You can also email me here, koberhauser@wisc.edu. But yeah, here are some websites just to kind of remind you of what I told you about. And now I will stop and answer questions. It looks like they're popping up in the
There
chat.
are a few. Thank you first. Thank you so much. That was really excellent overview of the project and how we can participate, and also just fascinating information about Monarchs live. So thank you so much. It was excellent.
What was
Um,
fun? Yeah.
there are questions. A few people are wondering about kind of minimum site size for a monitoring site. Like if you have just 20 or 30 milkweed plants over half an acre, or even in my garden, I probably have fewer than 20 milkweed plants right now. What's minimally
Yeah.
useful in terms of number of plants or site
Yep.
size?
So a minimum, an absolute minimum is one. You can do it with one, but there are certain analyses that we wouldn't use your data for because that gives you kind of skewed densities of monarchs. We do all of our survival analyses from sites that have 10 or more. You know, it's like a poll of people, a political poll. The more people you ask, the better picture you'll get of the whole population. So more is better. But if you have a garden with 10 plants, that's totally fine. Um,
Excellent.
or even one.
Excellent. Um, and that probably, even if that's what you have in your garden, that's a great place to start because you don't have to travel anywhere. It's just right out your door, and that makes it a lot easier to do weekly monitoring than if you're picking a place that might have more plants, but that you have to travel to.
Yep, it's
Um,
really easy. I do it in my yard. And yeah, it's nice to kind of know what's in your yard and it makes you want to plant more milkweed, which is awesome.
yes. So Kim is wondering when we're going to start seeing eggs in New Hampshire, if you have any sense of that, either from the data that's been submitted or just your own.
Yeah, so they're there. So here's data from New Hampshire right here.
Oh,
This is 2026. So there were some eggs there at Katie's site in late May. Um, then she started seeing fewer, but she saw them all the days she went out. We don't have, she goes out, obviously. Maybe she went yesterday and I downloaded this, so I don't know her. But yeah, so they're there. They're back.
that's it. And there, that site at Rise on the seacoast, so they might be a little bit further ahead of those of us who are in the Monadnock region. Their climate tends to be a little bit more moderate, but so it sounds like it's time to start looking regardless, wherever you might be in New Hampshire.
Yeah,
Um,
so last year we didn't have the rye site. Um, yeah, so well, they weren't seeing them until the end of June inland. These are, I think, all inland sites.
yeah.
So yeah,
But we're right there now. So,
yep.
and I think maybe a good one to end with is um, Suzanne's wondering about their status as a threatened or endangered species, and if they'll be listed endangered. Um, and if there's
Yeah.
anything you can share, but I know that's probably a very complicated question to end
I
on.
wish I had a
Um,
crystal ball. Yeah, so that has been a very long, drawn out, interesting process. So where it stands right now is the Fish and Wildlife Service determined that they met the criteria for being listed as a threatened species, which is one level better than endangered. Um, so they went through like 10 years of data analysis and really worked hard on that. And um, then the Fish and Wildlife Service is not, then they sort of put them in this holding pattern where they're that's the decision of the Fish and Wildlife Service, but they've just gone into this category of waiting action. So the decision has been made, but they're waiting. The action actually is the law. So the Fish and Wildlife Service makes a recommendation, and then it becomes a law that they're protected. And that's and there's um, no legal, um, there's not a legal limit on how long they can be in that sort of holding pattern. Certainly, there will be lawsuits that are saying they should have listed that, they should have gone through the whole process, but it's a political thing. It has left science and is now political.
okay, well, thanks for that update. Thanks for distilling it to an understandable, something understandable for the rest of us. And Thank you again so much. I hope that this has inspired all of you to go out and start examining your milkweed plants very closely in your communities or in your yards. I'm feeling inspired to start looking at my own plants in my yard, even though I'm part of this other monitoring effort at a more public site. But it'd be great for all of us Granite Staters to start counting our caterpillars and sending in that information. So I hope that this has inspired you to do that. And we will send out follow-up links and information once we have the recording ready to go. Sometimes that takes us a few days or up to a week. So if you don't hear from me right away, don't fear, it's coming. But we'll share these resources with you so that you can get started. And thank you again. This was really, really excellent. So we're so glad that you joined us.
Yeah.
And
I
thank you very
really enjoyed
much.
it too, and I'm excited, Kim, that you're going to go out and look tonight, and Nora, that you planted some swamp milkweed. So swamp milkweed is a great species to do this on. So yeah, and I'm just an email away if you have any questions, and Brett's right there too.
Wonderful. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
everyone. Enjoy your
Thank you.
milkweed.